Hello everyone. This video is about the fact that writing requires you to think and to think creatively as well as critically. And I'm making this video because a lot of multilingual international students and faculty believe that if you just have good grammar and enough vocabulary, everything will be fine. And the other point I want to make in the beginning here is, if you look at that image, is that writing means taking a risk, because when you write, you are going to fail, and you are going to fail repeatedly. So you have to toughen up and understand that writing is a process, and failure is part of that process. It will make you stronger, and it will make you a better writer. So everything I'm going to talk about today comes from a video that I watched by Dr. Tina Seelig, who is at Stanford University, who made this design about creativity in general. And she has these components of creativity that we're going to go through one by one. So just as in anything else, you need to think about the idea of writing as well as the idea of public speaking or doing anything. It means first that you have a great idea. You have to have something worthwhile to say, something worthwhile to write, and then you must be able to transmit it coherently. I'm sure you've had many professors and many friends who are trying to explain something to you, and they can't make it coherent. So good writing is about not only being creative and imaginative and having a great vocabulary and, yes, having good grammar, but also being able to transmit information coherently. So let's talk about the first component, and that is imagination. We need to think very creatively and imaginatively when we start to write a paper. This is a process. It does not happen quickly or easily. One of the reasons that this process is so hard is that we've been to school and we've been taught that there is one right answer to a question. If you look above, 5 plus 5 equals, yes, 10. But if we started to think about this question a bit more creatively and instead inverted it to the question below, what plus what equals 10, you'll find out that there is an infinite amount of ways to solve that problem. And writing is like that too. You can make a thesis statement and you can argue a myriad number of things about your thesis statement. So again, the coherence comes in. And the other thing to note is that our education system here in Kazakhstan, as well as in other countries, especially even now in the United States where I come from, it is not a system that is directing people toward being creative. It's actually directing us to just follow orders, be obedient, respect authority, be quiet. It's a very robotic system. So the other point to make as a writer is that if you are not extremely selective about your word choice, your ideas may not be passed creatively and coherently to your reader, to your audience. For example, if you were going to write a paper about how to have a great celebration in Kazakhstan, now that word celebration means many, many things. So if you selected a more specific term, how to have a great 16-year-old birthday party in Kazakhstan, then your thesis and your topic is narrowed down and you can write something that is very coherent and very specific. If you just used the word celebration, you'd end up writing a 1,000-word book. The other thing to think about as a writer, and all creatives do this, is looking at the ways we can frame and reframe our problems. So this is like taking a different perspective on the question and looking at the question from all different kinds of angles. So if you have a thesis statement where you're studying something, for example, I like to study the idea of identity among multilinguals. So there's so many different ways to look at that question. You can look at identity in terms of behavior. You can look at identity in terms of language choice. You can look at identity in terms of how you treat others who are not part of the group that you identify with. There are just a lot of different ways. So it's a good idea to examine those different ways and to think about them before you focus in on your own subject. And as you can see, looking at something one way, another person will look at it in a different way. And so, again, the idea of being very, very clear and very specific is extremely important. Another great idea that a lot of creative people do and a lot of writers do is they don't take themselves super seriously in the beginning because they're experimenting, they're exploring, they're going on an adventure and learning to think about their topic or their thesis and their subject. And so if you look here, you can see this is a Japanese art form. It's called chinsagu. And what it is it's doing something useless that looks actually practical. I urge you to explore this website, but it's making kind of useless things from a practical perspective. And this is a very useful thing to do because it's like brainstorming and mind mapping. It opens up your mind to think about your topic and to just be more tolerant of different ways of considering how you're going to write. Another thing that was mentioned in Dr. Selig's talk, and these examples come directly from her talk, is giving students and faculty challenges to do things that will make them think about the important concept, the big idea. And she gave a challenge to students around the world, telling them to look in their trash and then to make something of value out of that trash. And some students in Ecuador picked up some trash that, as you can see, is yard trash. And then they made this beautiful, beautiful collage, as you can see, of a bird. Another student in another country took out her trash, and her mother had just thrown away a bunch of old socks that had holes in them. And the student decided to make value out of this by creating a sweater. And that's what she did. So the idea behind that is not to take trash and make something beautiful, but to think about what you value, the concept of value itself. So in good writing, we have to think about those big ideas and be able to define them and to be able to have a very firm grasp of how we're going to talk about them and present them to our audience. For example, a big core idea that I like to write about is the word identity. And that is a huge concept. You can Google the word identity and find thousands of ways to define and determine it. So, in terms of value for me, I like to look at identity in terms of linguistic choice. So, that is my core value, how people use language to define themselves as a person or a member of a group. Of course, if you're going to be a great writer on a specific topic, you need to have knowledge. And so, one thing to think about is where do we get that knowledge? In today's world, we can get knowledge from the internet on almost anything we want. And we have to be very careful to carefully and critically evaluate the sources that we use from the internet to make sure that they're authentic. Traditionally, we get knowledge from books and we get knowledge from our professors. And a very good way to get knowledge is to talk to other people. This is why universities are in existence and why institutes and think tanks, these give you a venue to communicate with other people and exchange ideas. And that is an extremely powerful way to gain knowledge. So don't write in isolation. Always try to collaborate and communicate and exchange information and ideas with other people, especially people that are in your own peer group. Another thing that Dr. Selig brings up is the idea of our attitude toward information and our attitude toward learning. So traditionally, because of the way that we're brought up in schools, we are like jigsaw puzzle piece people. We want to find the answer and put everything in place and make it all come together. That's not the way that knowledge works. It's more of a patchwork kind of quilt, as you can see on the right there, because we learn in chunks and we learn incrementally and we learn not linearly. So a jigsaw kind of mentality, trying to find all the pieces and put them together, is not often a way that's going to be a successful way to learn to write. It's much better in terms of writing is to find something, write it down, think about it, move it around, revise it, add something from somewhere else. And also the quilt reminds me of a multidisciplinary approach. If you're going to write seriously about any topic at all, you need to look outside of your own discipline and field because things are connected. I'm an educator, but I look in anthropology, I look in linguistics, I look in the social sciences and psychology. I look all over the different fields and I quilt together my ideas and build my knowledge by looking from a very variegated, open-minded perspective of things. So it's important to think about the idea that the more knowledge you have, the better off you'll be because you need that knowledge in order to become an expert in your field. And then that knowledge will be helped by your imagination because your imagination, be open to being playful and silly and to moving things around. So your imagination will fuel your ideas. But it's important to also recognize that your attitude, knowing that you are going to have to write and rewrite and revise and that your things are going to be rejected, all of that is part of the process. Keep a positive attitude. Keep an attitude of, I'm going to get up and keep moving no matter what happens. That attitude will keep you up in the air and keep you moving and flying towards success. So I don't know if you know this woman. Her name is Virginia Woolf. She's quite famous. She was one of my heroes when I was growing up. She's one of the most successful female writers in history. And she had a very hard life. Even though she was wealthy, she ended up committing suicide. But one of the things that she said was that a writer, especially a woman writer, needs to have a room of her own, a place to write. So you need to have a place that you can designate as your own place. This is my writing place, whether it's your desk at work or it's a little corner at home or you go to a library and write, whatever it is, you need to have that place and it needs to be your own and it needs to be safe and comfortable enough for you to sit quietly and to think and to write. Another tip that good writers and great writers and fiction, nonfiction, all kind of writers say is you need to have a routine to build the habit of writing, to write every day, to sit in a place, and to have a word count. I'm going to write 500 words every day. I'm going to write 10 pages every day. Whatever it is, this will build the habit and the discipline to keep you writing and to keep you at work, despite all the things that happen in your life. Whether you get married, you have a baby, you have a divorce, whatever happens, you will still keep writing. Because the bottom line is, unless you write, nothing will get better. You cannot learn to be a great writer, an expert writer, a coherent writer, unless you practice. And practice means consistent, regular, daily routines. So you're probably thinking, well, where am I going to get the resources to do this? And of course, when we think about writers' resources, we always think about money. And money truly is important. But the best resources that good writers have are people. Because it's only by communicating with other people and talking about your ideas and asking people for help, finding an editor, having a friend, even a pair of eyes look at your work, having a professor, a teacher, someone who knows your subject look at your work, talking to your own mother about your work so that you can find out if she understands, if what you're saying is clear. So money is great, but people are better. So culture is another really big word, and I'm going to say that, of course, culture infuses your life and your behavior and your actions, and there are cultural ways of writing. But one of the things that's really important to think about is how does your culture approach the idea of failure? Because as a writer, I've said this over and over again, you're going to have to revise, you're going to be rejected, some of your work is going to be thrown in the trash can, you are going to fail. So how does your culture approach failure? And there's also another thing I want to talk about with culture. So I want you to look at this picture and listen to this music. Okay, so now I want you to keep looking at this picture and listen to this music. Do you get the idea? Culture is really kind of like a background music. And it's really interesting to think about how our culture impacts the way we feel as writers. When we think about failure, you know, scientists consider every failure they make in the laboratory as just a way to collect data. But does your culture have the happy music or the funeral music? And I think it's really important to think about culture in this way. And as writers, we have to be aware of how we are impacted by other things around us so that we can continue to write and to continue to fly. So, once again, let's take a look at this model from Dr. Seelig. And as you can see, your imagination runs parallel to your habitat. So the more positive you have a place to think about writing and to work in writing, the better it will be for your imagination. If you look about the knowledge and resources, they run parallel to each other as well. So the more knowledge you have, of course, the better off you are. And the resources, connect with other people, connect with experts in your field, keep reading, keep talking, and keep writing. And then in terms of the culture, our culture and our attitude are extremely entwined with each other. So be aware of what your culture is directing you to do and try to keep your attitude as positive as possible. It's okay to live in a culture where maybe failure is not a good thing as long as you keep your attitude positive and know that as a writer, every time I revise, every time I'm rejected, I'm just going to get better and better at what I do, and I will continue to learn and grow. So thank you for listening. Here is a snapshot of where you can find Dr. Selig's original video if you're interested, and I hope this helped a lot.